Hi, it's Lauren, and welcome to the Rah Rah Podcast. On the episode today, I spoke with Michelle Price. She's an Australian journalist with over 20 years' experience. I really enjoyed this episode in particular because Michelle is really passionate about her work, and you can tell that when she talks to me. She also has so many interesting stories to share. We discussed, her career in journalism. We talked about some of the most important stories that she's covered, how to get to the heart of the story, and really about why she loves what it is that she does. So I hope you'll enjoy the episode. It's starting now. Today I'm joined by Australian journalist Michelle Price. As a journalist with a career spanning over 20 years, Michelle has spent a majority of that time researching, writing, and reading the news for several number one ranked radio shows. In 2018, she was given the opportunity to become a full-time journalist. She wrote local, state, and national news for 13 websites targeted at regions across Queensland, Australia. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today is I'm kind of interested in, especially in the current climate at the time of recording, we're sort of in the middle of the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic. So I really wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit about the mindset of journalism, how to kind of balance some of the challenging situations that you come up with, how to be objective, and things of that nature, and sort of a little bit about how to really get to the heart of the story. Before we kind of delve into all of that, which is going to be a big conversation, maybe in your own words, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and sort of how you got involved in journalism?
Yeah, well, it's funny, Lauren, for a long time, probably when I was 3, I can remember Mum and Dad would say to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, well, I want to be a newsreader. And I was saying that from about the age of 3. So, and I'd sit down and I'd watch the news, and I knew none of my friends were really doing that. So I always felt like I wanted to do that. And then went through high school, met a cute boy, a lot older, kind of lost my way a little bit with my schooling, didn't do so well, didn't get a great OP. And so I sort of ended up working in retail and a few other things. And then one day Dad sort of came along and was like, well, what are you going to do with your life? You're going to keep working at Coles, or are you going to do something else? And what about this news thing? And I said, well, I just don't know if I can do it. And so we did a private course, like in radio and TV, and had a couple of mentors there, and they just believed in me. And I think, Lauren, the important thing that I've sort of learned is that all you need is one person. You just need one person to believe in you. And that was life-changing for me. I had 2 people in that course who were very experienced newsreaders. One of them was a news director for a station, and both of them said, Michelle, you've got it. You can totally do this. And I, never stopped since that day. And went out and started studying journalism and got my job in commercial radio in my first year of my studies. So I didn't really know anything about being a journalist, and I found myself working in rural Australia, rural Queensland.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, kind of the challenges with being a journalist. I know that, not every day is peachy, and that very often a lot of journalists actually deal with content that some of us can't even read, let alone write. Before we get to that, though, can you tell me a little bit about, in general, what sort of the life, the day in the life of the journalist does look like?
Yeah, well, we really get that that adrenaline boost when we have those really big breaking stories happen. And it doesn't happen every day. Obviously, COVID-19 is a thing everyone's talking about currently, but what drives us is getting that big story. So either breaking that big story and getting it up before anyone else can get it up. But day to day, that's sort of what we're chasing. And for someone who started working in the 90s, we had scanners and fax machines and pages and like all these sorts of things. And it's quite primitive. You think of how far we've come. We read off sheets of paper, and now in the newsroom, everything is just buttons. You're just pushing buttons. There's no cart machines anymore, for those of you who remember cart machines. So everything is really high tech. Everything's moved onto social media. Twitter's super important. So day to day in a newsroom, all the emergency services now use Twitter. So we got a lot of our leads off there. So, I have tweet decks set up and I'm just basically monitoring all of my folders. So for traffic, accidents, emergencies, all that sort of stuff. And that's where we get a lot of our leads. Also people ringing up if they see something and emailing us. But day to day, that's sort of how it would operate, which is very different from the 90s.
Yeah. Do you think that it's been a huge improvement, or do you miss anything from, the times in the 90s?
I actually really miss this scanner, and I know you can get digital scanners. I know you can get them online, but I really miss the old analog scanner because it was so good. Like you could sit there and you could eavesdrop on all the different emergency services, and we never acted on it. And that was part of the agreement, I wasn't an ambulance chaser. I wouldn't get in my car and go out there to have a look, but you knew a lot of the stuff because you could hear all the conversations that you don't hear when you just see a Twitter post or something like that. So we do miss a lot of things.
Right.
So I do think the old way worked really well. But it's just the way that the modern newsroom works now.
Yeah. Over the last 20 years, are there any stories that you were a part of that really stood out for you, that you wrote yourself or that you were involved in?
Yeah, probably the biggest one, and it got me the most coverage. It got me international coverage. And being a journalist, 6 months, I was a journalist, a totalist, 6 months working in commercial radio. The Childers backpacker fire happened, and that was 2001. And that just changed my life. There was 15 backpackers perished in this terrible fire. Turned out it was lit by one of the people who'd been staying there who had some mental health issues. Wow. And that 100% changed my life. And that set me up, for the person that I am and the journalist that I am. That really changed my life. And one of the pivotal moments there was a BBC journalist, and BBC does an amazing job. So I'm not picking on them in particular, but that's who he worked for. And he was standing near a memorial where they had all the flowers and the tributes, and it was like a mountain. It was incredible, this tribute pile. And he dropped his lens cap into the pile of tributes, and he just sort of dove in there head first and was throwing things everywhere. And I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. And there were mourners everywhere and people kind of standing around because it was a day that Princess Anne arrived. So there was members of the royal family there, and he's just pulling everything out of these flowers. And from that moment on, I was like, I'm never going to be that person. Like I'm never going to want a story that badly, or a photo. I was in radio, so I guess photos weren't that important to me, but I'm never going to want a story that badly that I'm going to disrespect, the people who'd left those tributes and the onlookers, the people who were sitting there watching in shock that this person was doing this to this memorial.
Yeah. So where does humanity fit in with journalism?
I think it fits in because all of the people, we have to remember that everyone we're speaking to, even if it's a politician that is unpopular, a lot of people like to bag on politicians, but we have to remember that every single person that we speak to is a human being. They have a life, they have goals and dreams just like you and I. Yeah. And that can be forgotten when you ask someone what their title is, and often they'll ramble off something that could literally take 30 seconds to say, and in radio, time is everything. You kind of lose touch, with that humanity. So every interview that I go into, first and foremost, I like to shake hands. At the moment, we can't do that, but I like to shake hands and be very personable. And I'll often try and think of something, and this is a tip that an announcer gave me years ago. I'll often try and think of something out of the square, or, a bit left of field to ask them. So it might be, what color socks are you wearing, just to get a laugh or something. What's your dog's name? Do you have a dog? Or something like that, just something personal. And it's not something that I would use, but it's just to get that. Some people are very nervous. So it's kind of to get beyond that and then to get the real person. So I think humanity, there's always that connection that can be reached.
So I like that technique for almost building trust with someone, building rapport. Yep. It's like, I'm not in here to talk to you about this really devastating thing right now. Let's talk about something to kind of, connect as
lighten the mood. Yeah.
So is that sort of how you get people to open up to you? Basically, you just ask them
Absolutely.
about things they feel comfortable about. What about when someone's really
Yeah.
not willing to talk, but you really need their point of view?
Well, Lauren, I've got a really good example of that. Years ago, I interviewed the former Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, and Kerry O'Brien was his media advisor. He used to be in the 7:30 report on the ABC. And I rang Kerry and I said, look, I really want to speak to Gough. He was in Ipswich doing this kind of opening of this memorial that he had originally opened, but it was like an anniversary of the opening. And Kerry said to me, in uncertain terms, he will not speak to you. He doesn't speak to journalists. It will not happen. Don't go. Don't waste your time. So me being me, I'm very headstrong and Taurus, so I don't give up. So I marched down there. I had my microphone. I had my notebook. I walked in and Gough must have been like, he was well over 6 foot tall. He was a very, very tall man and he had a hat and he tipped his hat to me. Couldn't believe it. And I walked in and I said, hi. And I stuck my hand out and I said, I'm Michelle from the radio station that I was working for. And I'd really like to speak to you. And immediately when he saw that I was from a radio station and I had a microphone, he kind of, took a step back and was a bit wary of me because he'd copped a lot. I mean, he'd been asked over and over and over about the Governor General and all that stuff. And I said, look, Gough, I highly respect you. My dad has always spoken really highly of you because you gave my dad free education. Like he got to go to university for free because of you. And you're someone in my family that, is very important and a real role model and someone that we all respect. And so once I'd sort of done that spiel, and it was very natural, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't know what I was going to say to him. Yeah. He sat down and he said, okay. He said, I'll speak to you as long as I can hold the microphone. So he did. He took my microphone and we did an interview. And his media advisor rang me afterwards and said, I can't believe it. No other media showed up because he told all of them not to go and no one else went. So I was the only one there. I had an exclusive interview with Gough Whitlam. And the council, the mayor actually wrote a letter to my radio station at the time and just said that was incredible. I can't believe it. So my lesson from that, and I tell a lot of the cadets the same story because you just can't give up. And I connected with him at a level, at that heart level. So I understood that he was afraid and that he'd been asked all these terrible questions, put through all this stuff. But I connected with him at that level and just said, we'll talk about what you want to talk about. Let's just talk. And I got the interview.
Yeah. So that sounds like it would have been a very memorable interview for you. Are there any other memorable interviews that you've had in the past that come to mind now?
Memorable probably for the wrong reasons. But Bob Catter, I think most people know Bob Catter. He's a bit of a personality and he can get very fired up. And I knew I was going to talk to him at Palazzo Versace, and that was when I was on the Gold Coast. And I did a bit of research, and this is something that I tell a lot of newcomers to do, is always do your research and try to find the angle that no one else has, because there's nothing worse than going to a press conference and everyone's just like, meh, 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 asking all the boring questions. So I did some research. I was like, okay, so his half-brother is gay and he's openly gay, and that's cool. I knew that Bob had his own opinions about that sort of thing and that it was World Gay Day. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to ask a question about that and just see, I didn't know if they spoke or if they had any sort of contact or anything. So I'm sitting there at this press conference. Everyone's asking the boring questions. My heart was in my throat. I was so petrified of asking these questions. And anyway, I just put it out there. I said, hey, have you spoken to your brother today? It's World Gay Day. And he was actually organising events. I knew that he was quite, he was doing a bit of stuff around that. Yeah. And Bob lost it. He just lost it, went on this massive rant. Everyone's like, oh, looking around. Oh, this is gold. You could see all their eyes lighting up. And it actually became more the lead. Like a lot of people use that as their lead. And they had my story in there. So they had my question in there and the whole thing. So it just changed the whole face of the press conference and everyone kind of forgot what they were there for. So it's really super important. And that's one that sticks in my mind because it took a lot of courage, and I don't like to upset people. I don't like to burn bridges or anything, but I was like, he's just one of those politicians that's so opinionated. And I just thought, I just want to get him on this because we've got same-sex marriage and everything legalized. And this was before that. Yeah. It's a super important point and we should be talking about it. And if he's got those views, people should know that before they vote.
Yeah, agreed. So I do want to talk to you in a minute about how you stay objective when you're writing a story, especially if you're writing a story that, really kind of goes against maybe who you are as a person. But before that, you know, you kind of talked about how when you were going to have that interview that you were really thinking about, you know, what's the story here, or what is an angle that I can use that's going to be a unique point of view. And that kind of comes down to like one of the questions I did want to go into with you today, which is about how do you get to the heart of the story? Because I think that when you think about the heart of the story, it almost can sort of confirm your why of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that relate, you know, regardless of the industry that, you know, you're in, if you know your purpose or you understand like what you're trying to get out of something, I think that you can almost do it better. Yep. For you, how do you identify the heart of the story, especially if you have such a huge topic? How do you connect that to your why?
The best thing I can say with regard to that is when I started out, the advice that was given to me was always imagine that you're speaking to a family member. So I used to imagine that my grandma was in the room. So what would perhaps my grandparent be interested in knowing about, and what would, you know, the family next door, my neighbors, be interested in knowing about? So when I'm figuring out a story and what the crux of it is and what I'm going to communicate, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the general public and determine what they need to know and what they should know about this particular story. So, because it doesn't come down to me. I mean, I have my own interests and beliefs and biases. So I've got to put myself out in the, you know, the Judy Smith, whatever the demographic is for the website I'm writing for or the radio station I'm working for, whatever that demographic is, and we all have them, you know that. So I'm aiming my stories at that person and what her interests are, because I want her to read it. I want her to listen to it. So that's what I'm always thinking in the back of my mind. And that allows me to be objective because it takes me out of it entirely. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you ever written a story where you've kind of, you know, really needed to like rework it so that you really weren't emotionally involved in it? I mean,
yeah, it's the ones that I find difficult, I'm a bit of a greenie. I'm a bit of a conservationist.
Yeah.
Certain parts of Queensland people are very pro-mining and things like that. So some of those ones are tricky, but all you can do, and all any journalist, good journalist can do, is get both sides. So as long as I have the side of the mining company and the side of the protesters and make sure that that's all balanced and fair, that's all I can do. Again, I sort of have to take myself out of it. But ones like that are really tricky for me because I have strong beliefs, but I can't let that come across. It can't come across because I have to be objective.
I think that sometimes for me in, you know, the past few years especially, I'm really aware that news really affects me. And if there's a story that's a difficult topic or a story that's just, I guess, for lack of a better word, really ugly, I can't even read it. And sometimes I feel offended by the headline. How do you deal with content of that nature, you know, when you have to write it?
The ones that actually, while you were speaking, I was thinking about the dog cruelty ones, animal cruelty. They're the ones that, I find it tricky. And I'll have other journalists come in and say, oh, we've got this story on Facebook, you know, these photos have been sent to us, et cetera, et cetera. I can't even look at the photos, but I'll put on the headline, graphic content, warning. We've got a banner. If I have a banner, then I'll put that up, a bit of a warning to let people know. But those stories, incredibly, they just do really well. They do really well online. And I think people have a very strong empathy with animals, and they want to help and they want to, you know, condemn the person who did the act. But stories like that I really struggle with, and I often I have to really balance it up within myself. Do I really want to put this out there and have those images out there, even with the warnings, or do I just not even do it? I think you've really just got to weigh up the benefits. Do people need to know about it? And there was one that I did do. I've done a few, not too many. I really do. Sometimes I just put them to one side. But there was one gentleman who was an international tourist at a university, and he had treated, I think it was some kind of, echidna, terribly, abysmally, and he got caught in the act, and it was really disturbing. But it was to the point where it was at a university where there's a lot of other students and people around, and he just had no regard for the animal whatsoever, like no regard for its life. He's like, oh, well, I thought it might hurt it, but I didn't think it'd kill it. So with that, balancing all of that up, and I thought, geez, people need to know about this person. And I'm really glad that I did, because people were really thankful. They were thankful. They were like, thank you for letting us know about this. And I managed to get the result of his court appearance. So there was a bit of closure there as well. So I won't do it with all of them, but with things like that, where it is at a high profile university on a campus, this is happening, I was just so shocked. And I think it was the right decision.
Do you think sometimes that, going back to that, you do have, almost these key performance indicators, these KPIs that you need to hit, such as driving traffic to your websites or getting people to listen longer on the radio station? And people do naturally a lot of people anyway, want to listen to or read, news that is slightly shocking. Have you ever, knowing that people will gravitate to the website to read the story, have you ever decided, fine, I'm just going to put this story out there? Or have you decided, you know what, I'm just not even going to bring it to light, and I'll just know that, I didn't maybe do that properly for the company, but at the same time, I did it right morally for myself and for others?
Absolutely. There's a lot of stories. Yeah, there's a lot of stories that I'll see that are trending really well. And I'm like, that's just really disturbing, or whatever the content is. You've got to remember, people, it's interesting, human nature, a lot of people will say, oh, I don't like the news because it's negative, or it's about murder and all this stuff. However, if you post that story about the man who killed his family in Brisbane and took his own life as well, if you put that up, everyone's reading that. Everyone is reading that, even though people will say, oh, I don't want to know about that, it's so disturbing. Everyone's in it. So it's interesting, because I felt like that was something that we had to do, and it was very upsetting for a lot of people, but we had to put that up. And as we put in Lifeline and all those sorts of contacts to be responsible. But on the same note, there's a lot of stories that go up that are trending really well, and I look at them and just go, it's not even worth my time. Like, it kind of feels like it's a little bit below where I'm at. And I think we all have to have that moral compass. Yeah. And that's kind of how I gauged it. I think that was important. That was an important message, because domestic violence is an issue and people do need to know about it. And that was, I think, coming up to International Women's Day as well.
Yeah, it was.
So that's really important to talk about stuff like that. But I have to have that moral compass, and I have to draw the line somewhere where I'm like, yes, so-and-so, whatever media company it is running that story, I'm not going to go there. So yes, I will make that decision, knowing that it probably would rate really well.
So do you ever have any stories that are, of that nature that really linger with you after, when you take them home, and, kind of how do you deal with that? Because I would imagine that almost on some level, a lot of journalists would experience symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah. We had a very close call on when I lived on the Gold Coast, and a police officer was shot at a tavern. Some people might remember that story. It was very high profile. That tavern was at the end of our street. So we actually woke up, the gunshots when he was being shot to death woke us up. And I looked out the window. We were on a big hill, and we looked down and we could see the lights, all the lights from the emergency services. And I was doing brekkie radio, started really early in the morning, went past it all, and I thought, that's not right. I just had a feeling, because we sort of, when you wake up, you're a bit confused, and I thought, I don't know if that's gunshots or not. Went to work and found out that it was a police officer shot and killed. So the whole, from the beginning of that was huge for us. Like, that was a massive story. And I said to the guys at work, like, this is literally at the end of my street. So I went back and was able to sort of speak to people on the ground and get some images and stuff like that. But I covered that story from beginning to end, and that was very close to home because it was literally in my street. And we had a colleague of mine who was pregnant at the time, and when they had the funeral for that police officer, and his two little children were at the funeral, and one of them, a little boy, very cute, he was waving to the coffin and saying, "Bye-bye, Daddy." And we just all broke down, and she broke down, and she was pregnant. She had to go up and read that bulletin. And this is what I want us to talk about this, because it's very rare, and I think it's very unusual for a newsreader to break down, to actually cry. And this poor colleague of mine who was heavily pregnant cried through the whole bulletin. It still went to air, but, I think sometimes people have to see how much this does affect us. And it does behind the scenes. All my colleagues have been in tears in the newsroom, all of them. I've never had a newsroom where people haven't been emotional about something. And so we're all hugging and consoling each other. And then we just go up and we do it.
Yeah.
And we read the news.
So I want to talk to you in a minute about, maybe some coping strategies that you do implement in those tough times. But I guess I just wanted to share a small thing about my past. So I went to school for radio broadcasting, and there were times where I actually was a newsreader as well. And I remember one time I was reading a story, and the way that the newsroom worked in my radio station is I couldn't read the news before, because often they were updating it while I was on live. So I didn't have any warning that, I remember reading this story, which I won't go into the details, but it was so horrific. And as soon as I finished that bulletin, I said to myself, I never want to read the news again. I never want to be someone who delivers that story or that kind of content to anybody ever again. And, I'm sure I had to go and read the news still after that, but I never made a point of pursuing that field. So, for me, I knew that I couldn't do it. I didn't have the stomach for it. And, I know that you're a sensitive woman as well. So it's interesting that you seem to be able to kind of almost turn it on and off. But do you have coping strategies that you do use to make sure that, these stories don't haunt you in your dreams and affect you, at night?
Yeah. You kind of put yourself to one side. It's a little bit like what I was saying before about when I'm trying to be objective. So I've been through breakups, I've been through losing pets, and I've still had to back up in the morning, and no one's been any the wiser, because my voice doesn't change, my delivery doesn't change. You just put that to one side, and then you go to the bathroom in between the bulletins and you cry, and then you go back and you read the news. That's just what you do. It's almost like, I guess, being an actor. I have a performance. I have something I have to do. That's my job. But, I've been reading the news for over 20 years, and everyone goes through stuff. And you just, off air, you cry while you're typing or whatever you're doing. And then you get up there and you read, and you sound like you do every other day, and no one knows any different. And you still laugh and you still crack jokes. And I don't know if it's good. Like, I don't know if that's a good thing for your personality, but you kind of learn to separate. So you put it into categories. So my personal life is here, and my work life is here, and that's what I do. And I never took days off when I was going through stuff. I just worked through it. And maybe some people are better at doing that than others. It definitely is a technique. And I've seen interns, like we've had interns come in and they've spent a day with us and been so overwhelmed that they've never come back, because it is really fast paced. And it's not so much the hardcore stories or anything. It's more just that there's so much happening, and we're recording off the TV, and we're reading and we're writing and we're doing the traffic and weather and all this stuff in the sport. And for some people it's just too much, and you just can't see how you could fit into that and do all of those things. So it definitely takes a certain kind of personality.
One thing that really has stood out with me with just listening to you talk today is sort of the element of storytelling, covering the news and talking about that car crash and doing all these things, but you really are a storyteller. And sometimes the story is a horror, and sometimes it's an action, and sometimes it's a drama, and sometimes it's a comedy. Would you sort of agree with that?
Yeah, you put that so well. I hadn't actually thought of it like that, but very much so. We have a lot of fun. It's news isn't all macabre and disturbing. Sometimes we just have a great time putting in puns and wherever we can, and finding a funny take on stories. And there's so many happy stories, like with pets doing funny things or amazing things, and it's just finding those stories. And ultimately, we're always looking at, like I said before, how can I target my demographic. You know, what is my demographic? What
Yeah.
do they want to, what do they want to know about? And we need to have that light and shade. We need to have that something funny. So often what we'll do in a on-air sense is have maybe the hard-hitting big stories of the day, and then go into something sort of crime or something in the middle, and then we finish off with maybe a line off the back about this funny dog story or funny cat story or something like that. So we try to finish with something positive, and then you go into your sport, and that's obviously a bit kind of up there as well in terms of energy. So I love the way you put that, because it really is a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit of an up and a down, and, you know, that one line, that kind of funny line at the end before you go into your sport is a really good sort of segue, because it sort of lifts that energy back up again. Yeah, it's cool. I hadn't thought of it like that.
One of the most wonderful things to watch on YouTube are news bloopers. Times when news readers or presenters have accidentally said the wrong thing, Freudian slip, whatever the case may be. Has that ever happened to you? And do you have to pull in the actor part of you again to kind of deal with it?
I can't even tell you. I have so many examples. One of the funny ones was in the sport. I could not say this particular player's name, and you know, there's a lot of Samoan and Tongan names which are quite tricky. And I just could not say this person's name. So what we did was I was reading my bulletin, and when I got to the guy's name, one of the announcers I was working with, he was like, "You're not saying his name right." And I said, "All right, well, you say his surname. I'll say the rest of the story, and you just add his surname in." So what we did was I got to the guy's name. I turned my mic off. He turned his on. He said the name, and then I kept reading. So and it happened all throughout the whole morning. And I thought I'll probably get in trouble, but management loved it. They thought it was hilarious. But another time actually, and this is a tip that I give to a lot of cadets, is do not eat. Do not eat before you go on air, especially not things that are salty, because salt, you know, makes saliva gather in your mouth. And I inhaled, I'd eaten some cereal or something, and I somehow inhaled like a nut. And you know, when like it goes up your windpipe, and literally I had no voice. So I'm like reading, and I inhaled, and this nut went up my windpipe, and then I just had no voice. And I'm talking like zero. And so I'm like trying to squeak out this bulletin, and the same announcer came running around, flew into my studio, sat down, and read the rest of the bulletin for me, because I couldn't speak. Yeah.
And you're live on the air, so that's
live.
What happens.
Yeah, someone had to read it. Yeah, so he came in and read the rest of the bulletin in a newsreader voice. He put on his newsreader voice, which was hilarious.
You know, one of the things that's interesting to kind of talk about is, you know, the progress, like you said, that, you know, you've kind of been a journalist for 20 years. So you've seen such a huge span and huge development. And, you know, with that, we really, you know, we've all really started consuming a lot of our news online now. And I guess I just wanted your opinion on, you know, sort of clickbaity type things, because one thing that I think that you're really strong at is putting a clickbait type, you know, comment or post to get people to want to read your story. But your story is still about what you've kind of said it would be about. What are your thoughts on when you see journalists that kind of, you know, take these cheap ways of trying to hook people in, and the story's not even on the same topic? Or do you see that as being sort of cheating or just like cheap journalism?
I do, and especially if it's a subscriber one. So if it's a subscriber story where people have to pay for it to see it, then I do, because you're spending your money on that, and it's not going to give you what you expect. And that's something that I've always, I don't so much like the clickbait term for what I do, because I do think clickbait is more where in some women's magazines where they promise all these things in the headlines, you know, Meghan and Harry have broken up, stuff like that. You get in there and it's like a source said they, you know, this, that, and the other thing, and it's all rubbish. And so I don't feel like I do that, because I feel like I deliver what my, you know, headline is promising. Yeah. Although I do get a lot of clicks, I do often get a lot of clicks, but I think if you're going to charge someone, and this is a difference between on-air radio, I mean, it's free, anyone can listen to it. When you're online and you start to charge for stories, you have to deliver what you're promising. It's part of that moral code that I spoke about before. Would I feel comfortable putting something up that was rubbish and didn't deliver what I promised it said it would? yeah, I couldn't live with myself.
Yeah.
So you have to have that follow through, because to be honest, Lauren, I mean, who in their right mind, after being caught out with that a couple of times, who's going to continue to subscribe to that publication? They're just not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So what do you love the most about being a journalist? And now we've discovered also a storyteller. And, you know, why do you continue to stay in that industry?
I just love to keep people informed. My favorite thing is going to a coffee shop and listening to people talk about stories I've written. There's nothing better than that, you know, having people standing around the coffee shop discussing something that I have put my blood and sweat and tears into, and talking about what a difference it's made. And that does happen where I live. I often write stories that happen in my local area, and I've broken local stories that have gone national that started just in the area that I live in. And to go down to the dog park and have everyone saying, and they don't know who I am, so I'm just there anonymously, and they're like, oh, this person that did this story and it's gone national and it's changed our lives and all this sort of stuff. And there was a really good example of that last year with the storms, where I broke a story and that went national, and no one knew who I was. So I was still walking around, oh yeah, that's really interesting, engaging in conversation, not telling them, because it's not, I don't need that notoriety. But knowing that changed so many lives and got people results where they weren't getting any results, that's why I do it. I listen to these people walk around and say, oh, I was trying to get my builder and I was trying to get these people to fix this issue that I've got at my house. And everyone had a lot of issues after those storms. For me to intervene and then have, you know, the Building Construction Commission coming out, and they never do that. And all this media out here covering it, it was just insane. I couldn't believe where it went. And it just makes such a difference. And that's why I do it, because people on their own, they don't get that sort of response until the media gets involved. And the media, you know, with the right intention, I wanted to help these people. I had the right intention and I got the results, and that's why I do it. And I will never stop doing that, because I feel like people need to have a voice, and that's what the media should be. The people, we're a voice for the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And also I think it's so powerful, you know, that sometimes, you know, what journalists can do is hold people accountable. Sometimes though, you know, journalists and you included, you do suffer criticism. And I have seen before where people get really riled up and almost personal with stories. Do you find that to be difficult, that although, you know, you're doing all these wonderful and positive things, that, you know, sometimes people are missing the point and they're making it about you when they just don't like the way that the story has, you know, kind of developed to showcase a different side they might not be in line with?
Absolutely. There's probably 2 points there. One is that I sometimes find it hard when I'm seeing those comments not to take it personally. It is really difficult because often they are personal attacks about me. So I do find it difficult not to take some of those comments personally. But what I need to remember and what I remind myself of, and there was a good example of a story I did where a child was locked in a car in very hot conditions, and I copped even death threats over that. Like it really escalated. And what had happened, and what I've come to sort of understand over years of writing online, is that some stories, and especially where it involves children and parents, is that those stories can take on their own life entirely. So where my story was 3 lines, factual, these are the facts, this is what happened, didn't even mention the parents, just that this child had been locked in the car. So there was no blame or anything like that. But what happens with stories like that, and this is just parent judging, everyone's aware that happens. A lot of parents feel judged by other people. And people jump on there and they're blaming the parents and where were the parents and what were the parents doing. And then other people are like, oh, the parents this, and defending the parents and all this stuff. The story, it's like a wave. It literally it gets bigger and bigger and bigger till it's like a tsunami with all this hatred and vitriol and all this stuff. And then ultimately that comes back to the journalist. And I hadn't said any of those comments or anything. Like it was literally 3 lines. But somehow people get on and they're just reading the comments and not even reading my story anymore. There was no actual clicks into the story. It was more that people were reading the comments and going, oh, well, the journalist must have said this or the journalist must have said that. So that's what happened. It just became this, it had a life of its own. So I just have to realize that some stories will do that. So I ultimately am very cautious with stories like that in the future, because they just, anything to do with parents and children just get people really fired up.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that sometimes would stop you from wanting to develop a story, knowing that there's going to be a reaction of that nature?
I'm just really cautious, yeah, because I mean, what else can I do beyond just presenting the facts? I mean, I'm not judging anyone. I'm not mentioning the parents. So anything around those kinds of stories, I have to think in the back of my mind, is this going to go the same way?
Yeah.
Is this going to, head down that path as well? So I will weigh that up in my head, because I couldn't have been any more basic in the one that I wrote. And that happened. I couldn't believe it. The comments and things, it really does hurt.
But you seem to have a tough skin, and so I guess you were able to leave that at a certain point on the table and continue on. Whereas, what I tell to a lot of the interns and people who are coming through and getting into this industry is that you've got to remember, we're the ones who are putting ourselves out there. We're the ones who are presenting the stories. We've got our names on them. We're on air saying our names. So we're actually putting ourselves out there in the public eye. These people, I call them armchair critics. Yeah.
They're not putting themselves out there. If they were, they probably wouldn't be criticizing us the way they are. Yeah. So they're hiding behind their profile, and they're very happy to sort of throw all this criticism and vitriol around, but they're not the ones making the effort. And I always tell that to newcomers, because when you're new, you'll have people ringing up and saying, "Oh, I don't like the way you talk, or the way you read, or you pronounce this incorrectly." And you'd be surprised. We have a lot of people who ring in just to have a whinge at the new people that we put in into radio stations and things like that. And I just keep reminding them, because it can really get you down. If you're new and you're 19 and you're just out of uni, that can be crushing, like soul crushing. Yeah. So I just say to them, these people are armchair critics. Don't worry about them, because they're not putting themselves out there. You are, and you're going to make a success of it. You're going to get past this. And probably me being a Taurus and being really stubborn has helped me, because I'm like, I don't care what you say about me. I'm going to keep going. And some people don't have that. As I said, we'll have interns come in and just be so scared and shocked and run out very pale. Mm-hmm. But it takes a certain kind of personality to be able to get over that.
Brene Brown has an amazing Netflix special. Have you seen it?
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, so I love that that story where she was basically talking about reading all the criticism from people, and she found a quote, and it was basically about, if you're not in the same arena as me, you don't have the right to judge me. And I thought that was so powerful. Yeah. Yep, I agree. Just a final question, and then I'd like to do a little series of rah quick questions if you're up for that.
Hooray.
What role do you think journalism plays in our society, especially now? And in Australia, in the current situation we're facing, it's sort of separate from that actually, but one of the biggest Australian news providers has, declared that they will be shutting. And it's an interesting time, I would say, for journalism and for journalists in general. So, what role do you think journalism does play in society?
That's a really great question. And it's interesting. What I will say is that with the advancements in online journalism, radio used to be it. Radio used to be immediate, and we can deliver news, let's say every half hour, which is, fairly immediate, or we could break into programming and sort of, break news and keep people up to date with the latest developments. So radio used to be kind of the big thing, and then TV would be just recapping everything that happened during the day. Newspapers were the following day, so that was fine. Now everything's online. I feel like journalism has gone beyond anything that it's been in the past, in that we're keeping people abreast of things every second. Like, it's that immediate now, where something's happening and we're just behind the scenes, like crazy, getting these stories up and breaking them. We're keeping people abreast of things minute by minute. And we never had the ability to do that with other media before. So I think it's super exciting, and I think this is the way forward. I think all the online, the different mediums we have to work with now, it's so exciting, and I just think that it can just continue. And with us being in the situation where we're at the moment, where a lot of people are working from home and things like that, I think that's going to change the way moving forward, to change the way we do things moving forward as well. But yeah, I think the online stuff and journalists that are working online, and even with the closure of that large media organisation, I think it's just going to open another avenue where new people can come through with new ideas and put amazing content out there. It's forcing us to think outside the square, and to be more creative, with what we're putting out there.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So if we could just do a little series of rah quick questions. So this is just answer quickly, answer whatever comes to mind. So what is the most influential book that, you've read or that you would recommend?
Oh gosh, I'm a member of a book club, and I don't know if you can see, I've got a massive bookshelf behind me. But
yes.
One of the most amazing, probably life-changing books is The Alchemist. I always go back to The Alchemist. It's not a big read; it doesn't take a long time. But Paulo Coelho is just a brilliant author. Yeah, and really makes you think. It's always got that. You've always got to make sort of a moral decision in his books, and he allows you to make that decision. You sort of feel your way through it. And I really love that. I've got, I think, all of his books.
I love that book as well. So how do you continue to learn and grow and upskill yourself? What's like your one go-to, place for that?
I love listening to, it's quite appropriate, podcasts.
Yeah.
I love Brene Brown, Gabby Bernstein, all the big names. I just love listening to those guys, and Tony Robbins, and just learning. And because I think people who've done it, we can learn so much. How did they do it? How did they get to that point? They were like us at one point, where they had dreams and things like that. And I think a lot of what that teaches me is that you have to take risks. Sometimes you have to go outside your comfort zone, and you have to take a risk to get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. So if someone wants to be a journalist, what is like the biggest tip that you would offer them at this moment?
I would suggest considering, similar to what we were just speaking about, looking at online, looking at what you can do online, because it is changing and it is getting difficult to get in. There's a lot. I know people are still studying in their droves, and I don't want to be negative Nancy, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't bother, it's too hard. People said that to me and I ignored them, so that's not going to work with my sort of personality. But look at what you can do online, and even doing your own thing, maybe starting your own thing. If you're studying, maybe starting your own little blog or blogs, that's a great, that's something that I did. I had a really great blog and used to just put it all over WordPress sites and things like that. And it did really well. And so I think any way that you can get your name out there, so that people kind of associate you with being a writer, is fantastic. So that when you sort of break in, or you go to work in get a job in a newsroom or something, then you have something to show. Yeah. And it's just something you can add.
That's great. Name a mentor for you, and do you still keep in touch with them?
Yeah, probably I would say the mentor that I had was Scott McKinlay. So he was the news director from a Brisbane radio station that taught me at that radio and TV school that I did. And his belief in me was just immense. And he followed my career wherever I went. He always followed me. He'd always ring up and talk to me and touch base. And any questions I had, that he would answer them for me. And he brought me in for work experience many times in his radio station, so I could see how it worked in a big metro newsroom. And he was really pivotal in my life, and he actually helped me move to different areas. So he would tell the news director, this girl's really great, you should get her in. And so I didn't even apply for jobs. He would just, get me into these different newsrooms. So I have him to thank for my travels around Queensland, because, a lot of people I know in different industries, you have to apply for jobs and you have to go through the whole process of doing interviews and all those things. I never did. I just got phone calls and was told, this is where you're going next. And I just packed up and went. And that was all thanks to him.
Do you keep in touch with him still?
I actually haven't. You've made me think about that. Maybe I'll look him up on socials. But he ended up getting out of the news game back in the day, like quite a few years ago, and I sort of lost touch with him. So yeah, you've made me think I need to touch base with him and say thank you, because gratitude's important. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you would have told yourself earlier? One piece that you know now?
Oh, geez. Probably what we were talking about before is that I really have to keep reminding myself that you just can't take anything personally.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell myself that, you know, those people don't know you. They don't know that you're a sensitive soul, and, you know, that you have, you know, good morals, and, you know, you're a good person, because sometimes you forget that when you're reading those negative comments. You sometimes begin to feel like maybe I am that person. Maybe that is me. So I would just tell myself, know who you are really strongly, know who you are, know your attributes, and be really firm in that, and don't let anyone sway you, because that's when it becomes dangerous. When you allow people to sway your opinion of yourself, there's no coming back from that. So yeah, you have to be really firm with yourself.
So what's one thing that you'd like to achieve, a goal for yourself?
Gosh, is this just in journalism or in general?
Well, it can be whatever you want. One of the reasons why I actually asked this question is because I think that sometimes if people don't have a clear vision of where they want to go and grow, it's hard for them to get there. So you answer this however you want. You can take your journalism hat off, or you can leave it on. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I would like to work for myself. I think probably a lot of people have that goal, but I would like to work for myself. I feel like I've reached the point where, being a journalist for over 20 years, that I know how to write a story, I know how to interview people, and I know what my objective and my intention is. And so I would like to, put my own work out there under my own banner. And I guess moving forward, I mean, who doesn't want to work for themselves?
Yeah.
And,
Great.
you know, be able to work from home would be amazing. So there's a bit of freedom in that. And perhaps as you get older, that's something that people strive for more. And I know that that's where I feel myself. But aside from that, I really want to go to Europe and look at castles.
Yeah. Well, you could do both.
That's my bucket list, is to go to Europe and look at castles. So hopefully I can save up and do that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask today that you thought I should have?
No, but that's a really good journalism tip. I should actually say that. That's something that we say at the end of all of our interviews, because often when you say that, you get a new story. Or a new lead. Yeah, good tip, Lauren. Thank you for reminding me. At the end of every interview, just say, is there anything else you wanted to add? And then who knows what other worlds could open up for you.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Thank you for chatting to me.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best contact for that? And I'll leave it in the show notes as well.
Great. So on Facebook, my business page is Michelle R. Price, writer and clairvoyant. So I do a little bit of that as well. Instagram is Michelle R. Price. If you want to follow my posts, I do post there very frequently.
Perfect. I'll add all that in. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please do leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and please be sure to share it with your friends. Thank you so much for your ongoing support.